aficionados, to a podcast that will take you on an unforgettable journey into the heart-pounding world of mysteries, investigations, and justice. I'm your guide on this thrilling ride, and I promise you, it's going to be an electrifying adventure. Get ready to dive into the gripping narratives, the enigmatic cases, and the unrelenting pursuit of truth that make up Chronicles of Crime Untold Investigations. Now, you might be wondering, what sets us apart from the sea of true crime podcasts out there? Well, it's simple. We're not just telling stories. We're uncovering the untold, unraveling the unresolved, and seeking justice where it's long overdue. Picture this. Each episode is a locked door waiting to be opened, a cold case longing to be cracked, and a mystery begging to be solved. We'll introduce you to the detectives, the survivors, and the relentless advocates who have dedicated their lives to shining a light on the darkest corners of our world. But it's not all shadows and suspense. We're here to remind you that even in the face of darkness, there's hope. Our tales of triumph over adversity will inspire you. Our insights will intrigue you. And our stories will empower you to become a part of the solution. So, buckle up, dear listeners, because Chronicles of Crime Untold Investigations is more than just a podcast. It's a quest for justice, a celebration of resilience, and a reminder that the human spirit can conquer even the most daunting challenges. I can't wait to embark on this incredible journey with you. Get ready to be moved, amazed, and motivated as we dive into the incredible stories that make up the tapestry of crime and justice. Stay tuned for our first thrilling episode, coming your way very soon. Until then, remember, the truth is out there, waiting to be uncovered. And together, we'll be the ones to unearth it. The adventure begins. Episode 1. The Story of Tegan, Marie Davis, her brother Seth Anthony Davis, and Maternal Betrayal. On September 30th, 1981, the Davises rushed their son Seth to Greenbrier Valley Hospital when he displayed signs of a seizure. During his hospital stay, Seth had his blood tested, which showed a normal blood sugar level of 72. However, an examination of his spinal fluid revealed an abnormally low reading of 11. Seth's condition appeared critical, prompting medical authorities to make the decision to transfer him to Pittsburgh Children's Hospital, PCH, after about 3 hours. Upon Seth's arrival at PCH, medical professionals discovered a dangerously high level of insulin in his body, measuring at 320. Dr. Dorothy Becker, the attending physician at PCH, concluded that someone had administered insulin to Seth. She promptly shared her suspicions with Seth's treating physician in West Virginia, Dr. Joseph Aldrich, and instructed him to report the suspected child abuse to West Virginia authorities. Regrettably, Dr. Aldrich did not file such a report. Due to the substantial amount of insulin in Seth's body, he suffered extensive brain damage and severe cognitive impairment. Just 6 months later, on March 10th, 1982, the accused hurriedly brought Tegan to Greenbrier Valley Hospital. Tegan had been experiencing vomiting and discomfort while urinating. Subsequently, Tegan was admitted to the hospital. It became apparent that during the late hours of Tegan's admission, Nurse Helen M. Pack witnessed the defendant administering an injection to Tegan. Nurse Pack provided the following testimony about this incident. Prosecution. Did there come a time during the evening that you observed the defendant give Tegan a shot? Nurse Pack. Yes. At 2:15, Dr. Aldrich was out of the room, and Marybeth came in, went over to Tegan, and gave her a shot. And I said, "Well, what was that, Marybeth?" And she said, "That was thiamine." She says, "Now you can chart that it was 100 milligrams of thiamine." Marybeth asked, "Did you chart it?" Nurse Pack. I said, "Marybeth, I can't chart that's 100 milligrams of thiamine because I didn't give it, and I don't know for sure what's in there." Prosecution. Did you try to determine what was in the syringe? Nurse Pack. Yes. Prosecution. Can a registered nurse give a shot without an order? Nurse Pack. On her own? Not unless the doctor leaves like an order to say, use this if necessary. But there has to be some sort of, or some standing order, what they called standing orders, that he leaves with the patient, that if you need these, you can use anything on this list and write it as an order. It's like a standing order, but he didn't have any standing orders for Tegan. Prosecution. If a doctor was going to order a shot to be given, who would he order to do it? Nurse Pack. I would be the one to give it. Marybeth, she was an RN, but at that point, she was the child's mother. I was the nurse in charge. I was the one to be caring for the child. Prosecution. Have you ever known a doctor to give an order for a mother to inject a patient? Nurse Pack. Not unless it would be something at home. Not in the hospital, no. After the defendant administered a substance to Tegan, her condition deteriorated. On the morning of March 12th, 1982, plans were made to transfer Tegan to a larger hospital. Tragically, Tegan passed away in the ambulance en route to the hospital, and her body was returned to Greenbrier Valley Hospital. Dr. Ann Hooper conducted an autopsy on Tegan, and her findings pointed to homicide due to a caffeine overdose. Inside Tegan's stomach, Dr. Hooper discovered beads of caffeine pills enclosed in capsules. Dr. Hooper's expert opinion was that the fatal amount of caffeine in Tegan's digestive system could only have been ingested over a short period. On the evening of Tegan's passing, Mr. Davis found an empty blister pack, which had previously contained diet capsule pills, in a tied-up garbage bag on his back porch. An investigation into Tegan's death by law enforcement officials commenced in 1982, but was halted before 1985. However, the case was reopened in 1995. In November 1996, a grand jury issued an indictment charging the defendant with attempting to harm Seth by poisoning and first-degree murder of Tegan. Subsequently, the defendant was tried, convicted, and sentenced on both counts. The appeal in this case was pursued, asserting the following as errors. 1. Insufficient evidence to support the convictions. 2. Failure to dismiss due to pretrial indictment delay. 3. Omission of jury instructions on malice. 4. Failure to instruct on lesser included offenses. And 5. Instances of prosecutorial misconduct. In 1997, Davis faced trial for the murder of Tegan and the harm inflicted upon Seth. Prosecutors suspected that Davis had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a condition where individuals fake or exaggerate their children's illnesses to garner attention and sympathy. Despite her previous claims that Seth suffered from Lee's syndrome or an unspecified growth hormone deficiency, and Dr. Barry Wolf's belief that Tegan had a similar genetic disorder, Tegan had been diagnosed with Reyes syndrome shortly after her 1982 death. These conflicting details contradicted Dr. Hooper's murder assessment of Tegan. Nevertheless, Davis was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. April 2002. In the hopes of finding evidence that could exonerate Marybeth Davis of her daughter's murder, Tegan Davis's body is exhumed from a cemetery in Pennsylvania for forensic tissue testing. After 21 years in a vegetative state, Seth Davis passes away in a nursing home near Pittsburgh. The coroner in Pennsylvania categorizes his death as a homicide. October 5th, 2007. Marybeth Davis enters a plea agreement in which she pleads guilty to 2 counts of attempting to harm her 2 children through poison. She is sentenced to 3 to 18 years in prison on each count, to be served concurrently. Due to her more than 10 years of imprisonment, she becomes eligible for parole immediately. At the age of 55, Marybeth Davis was released from prison after accepting a plea deal and providing a one-word confession. Prosecutors argued that offering Marybeth Davis a plea deal, resulting in her release after a decade in prison, was a just outcome. However, the local newspaper criticized it, deeming it a mockery of the judicial system. On the other hand, her longtime defense lawyer viewed it as a strategic move. Paul Detch, the attorney who had represented Davis until a few years ago and remains her friend, remarked, "If this is what our system demands to secure release from prison, then so be it." She had no alternative but to reluctantly utter yes at the end of a paragraph to secure her freedom. Her current attorney, Kanawha County Public Defender George Castell, explained that she has refrained from speaking publicly because a single misspoken word could lead to her returning to jail. In accordance with the terms of the agreement offered by Greenbrier County Prosecuting Attorney R. Kevin Hansen. The agreement between Castell and the prosecutor was reached as they faced a November 1st hearing before Circuit Judge Joseph C. Pomponio, Jr., who was reviewing Castell's motion for a new trial. Castell had alleged that Detch's representation of Davis in 1997 was ineffective. Hansen, who took over the case at the start of his first term in 2001, believed there was a significant chance the judge would rule in favor of Davis. The court had recently overturned a murder conviction in another case represented by Detch, and Hansen saw merit in Castell's petition. Before agreeing to let Davis plead guilty to lesser charges of attempting to harm her children by poisoning them, Hansen consulted with former prosecutor Mark Burnett and the arresting officer, former state trooper Michael Spradlin. These pleas carried concurrent sentences of 3 to 18 years. Hansen insisted that Davis admit her guilt and promise not to assert her innocence again. The agreement stipulated that if she or her attorney retracted the confession, she would be returned to prison under the original life sentence. Davis acknowledged her guilt, and Pomponio annulled her convictions, vacated the life sentence, and accepted her guilty pleas. Years of good behavior in the Prunty Town Correctional Center and Lakin Correctional Center resulted in her immediate release without parole or further court supervision. Hansen conceded, "I'm sure some people will say she should never have been released." Retired State Police Sergeant Mike Spradlin, the lead investigator in the criminal case, took the stand and labeled the proceedings as just another tactic employed by Davis to secure her release, and strongly criticized the developments, characterizing Davis's actions as the most callous and cold-blooded case he had ever encountered. Spradlin questioned. When did the lawyer become ineffective counsel? Was it the 4th or 5th time they went to the Supreme Court? Seth was injected with massive amounts of insulin, and now she's going to plead guilty to attempting to poison. I can show you 2 graves that are filled with 2 bodies that were actually poisoned. She, Davis, was a nurse and knew the results of her actions. This is one of the most callous and cold-blooded cases I've seen in my 35 years in law enforcement. An editorial in the Register Herald on October 12th, a newspaper published in Beckley, a small mining community approximately 50 miles from Lewisburg, questioned Hansen's decision and the sincerity of Davis's admission. It posed the question, why not issue get-out-of-jail-free cards to every lifer who admits guilt? Hansen considered that 25 years had elapsed since the crimes, which had incurred significant costs for the poor, rural, southern West Virginia county to prosecute. He also took into account that Davis had served a decade in prison and was unlikely to reoffend. He expressed uncertainty about the outcome of another trial. Mark Burnett, a lawyer with a Harvard education who later served a term in West Virginia's state Senate, concurred that trying the case again would have been an immense challenge for Hansen. Some witnesses were deceased, and those sued civilly by Detch after the trial would likely be reluctant to testify. Financial constraints, as in 1997, when resources were limited for hotel accommodations, transportation, and expenses for medical professionals and witnesses, were also a consideration. Burnett believed that the plea bargain was fair, stating, "What she pled to was precisely what I would have offered her a decade ago, had her attorney pursued a plea deal, which he did not. I never believed she intended to kill her children, but there is absolutely no doubt that she intended to poison them, and did so. So, why did it take so long? Well, it's complicated. Both parties concur that the Davis case was intricate and time-consuming. Tegan had been deceased for nearly 15 years. Her resting place alongside her cherished dolls in a $450 white coffin on a hillside at Mount St. Macrina Cemetery in Uniontown, when Spradlin first encountered her name during his deep dive into cold cases. Upon discovering that the investigation had made little progress over the years, despite a medical examiner's 1982 report confirming that the young girl had been deliberately poisoned with diet pills, and the medical reports indicating her brother's debilitating insulin injection, Spradlin's curiosity was piqued. His fascination with the case led him to dedicate hundreds of hours to interview witnesses, review medical records, and engage with the nation's preeminent experts in pediatrics and endocrinology. By the time he presented the case to a grand jury in 1996, he had amassed sufficient evidence to secure indictments against Davis for first-degree murder and attempted poisoning. He firmly asserts that Davis was fully cognizant of her actions when she administered a fatal dose of diet pills to her daughter, effectively shutting down her organs. Furthermore, given her background as a nurse, she was well versed in the effects of insulin on her baby boy, Seth, who neither required insulin nor had diabetes. Medical professionals attested to Seth's brain damage, which left him in a permanent vegetative state, necessitating constant care and institutionalization. Spradlin passionately declared, "Someone needs to advocate for these children. This is the most heartless and calculated case I've encountered in 35 years. She's a nurse, and she knew what she was doing. December 1996. Marybeth Davis is indicted by a Greenbrier County grand jury on one count of first-degree murder in connection with Tegan Davis's death and one count of attempted poisoning involving Seth Davis. Prosecutors argue that she harmed the children under the concept of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a condition where a parent or guardian harms a child for attention or sympathy. In contrast, the defense contends that both children had undiagnosed genetically linked metabolic diseases. During Davis's 1997 trial, witnesses supported the prosecution's argument that Davis displayed signs of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychiatric condition wherein an individual harms someone else to garner attention. Prosecutors posited that she poisoned her children due to her desire for attention from her husband, Dr. Gary Davis, who frequently spent time away from their Lewisburg residence for medical training. Detch contended that Tegan's demise was due to Reyes syndrome, a potentially lethal ailment sometimes associated with aspirin, capable of causing organ failure. He further argued that Seth suffered from a metabolic disorder. In subsequent post-conviction appeals, Detch alleged that evidence and test results regarding the children had been misconstrued, misrepresented, or intentionally withheld by the county's former medical examiner and other pediatric professionals, including several from Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh. Prosecutors enlisted additional physicians who supported the medical examiner's conclusions regarding Tegan's death and concurred with the assessments of experts who treated Seth. Detch asserted that he had uncovered new evidence demonstrating that Tegan had no more caffeine in her system than the equivalent of a cup and a half of coffee. He steadfastly maintained that she succumbed to Reyes syndrome, while her brother suffered from human growth hormone deficiency. However, Spradlin remained unconvinced by this argument. He emphatically stated, "There's no evidence anywhere that would lead me to believe she didn't do it." He pointed out that prominent experts in endocrinology in Pittsburgh had endorsed the accuracy of their findings and had consistently stood by their assessments from the very beginning, emphasizing that they had no vested interests in the matter and were not influenced by external factors. Recap. At the tender age of 3, Tegan Davis tragically fell victim to her mother's malevolent actions, as Marybeth administered a lethal dose of caffeine pills, resulting in her untimely demise. Additionally, Marybeth caused her infant son irrevocable brain damage by administering insulin. Prosecutors argued that these horrific acts were motivated by Marybeth's affliction with Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Consequently, Marybeth Davis received a life sentence in prison, without the possibility of parole, and an additional sentence of up to 18 years for the poisoning of her son Seth. She ultimately took a plea deal and said, yes, she committed the crime, instantly freeing her from her life sentence. So that's it for this episode in the comments. Let me know what you think. Do you think Marybeth had Munchausen syndrome by proxy? Do you think the court was right or wrong for changing her sentence?